8 Simple Rules for a Better Overall Rank, a Firing Blanks podcast mini-series focusing on the strategy of FPL, looking at a list of rules to follow and chatting through it with top managers. This episode, we have Fantasy Football Scout Pundit, Let's Talk FPL creator, Andy. How's it going, man? Long time no speak.
Yeah, it's going good. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day in Scotland. It's been raining for 3 days straight, but we're having fun. We're doing well.
Sounds a lot like Ireland. Pretty much always raining. As if it's dry, that's a good day.
Yeah, the only day of the year. It's great. Always fun. How's your content creation been? It's been non-stop, it looks like.
Yeah, it's been nuts basically doing it across Scout and my channel as well. Yeah, very, very busy. I think it's pretty much at least 2 videos in most days since FPL launched, and it's only going to get busier up until launch. So I'm looking forward to getting Game Week 1 deadline out of the way, then it's back into like a regular routine then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you knew what you were signing up for, but oh my goodness, I don't think I'd be able to do 1 video a day, let alone 2. That's insane. That's some amount of work ethic, mate.
Yeah, it's good. You just get used to it, I guess. I enjoy it too. That helps.
Yeah, it'd be rubbish if you hated your job. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much for also adding this mini-series to your to-do list. I'm really, really grateful that you were able to come on. I sent you the list of rules that we're going to be going through. We're basically just going to go through them and you're going to tell me if they're good or not. Sound good to you?
Yeah, I do have one question about them though. Is it simply 8 simple rules because you can only think of 8, or is it based off the TV show?
It is based off the TV show. You were the first person to say that. I think it's such an old TV show, and hardly anyone watched it in the UK.
You have to hope you got some oldish people watching this. I feel like, that show's been forgotten about. I can't remember if it was any good. I felt like that was like a Channel 4 show, like repeated constantly forever for a while.
Yeah. Good stuff. I would recommend it if you've got nothing else to do. But yeah, so I'm good to get going, man, if you are.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, number 1, no hits. So that means as few as humanly possible. Obvious caveats being injuries or suspensions. But the basics of this rule is that hits don't make up for bad planning. What is your experience with hits the last couple of seasons, man?
My best ever, I've only finished in the top 5k once, and that season I took 96 points worth of hits. So I don't know how many that is altogether. I'm not going to divide it by... Yeah, it's a lot. I think it's like 24. I think it's 24 hits in 38 game weeks, and I finished in the top 5k. Now, it was a while ago, so I can't exactly remember why I took those hits and whether they were injuries and stuff. But I think people overthink hits quite a lot. Like there's this big magical thing that I would never chase hits. Like, I think people sometimes get into a routine where they take hits every single week, and it's so rare that actually works out. But I think a good hit, because you can plan, but your plan doesn't always go to plan, I guess. Like sometimes you bring in players and they're no good. They end up being no good. It's not necessarily anyone's fault. Sometimes it just happens. I think if you can make 2 really good moves with a hit to bring in 2 players that you want long term, I think that's the key. I mean, if you're bringing in players for 1 week punts outside of, maybe a double game week or something like that, again, it's all like an odds game, I suppose. You're trying to give yourself the best odds to get points, and betting on a player in a single game week is difficult. Like, how many times do you see people do like, here's my team of the week, here's my prediction for the week? How often do they get a massive score week after week after week? It's so difficult to do. So yeah, I think a lot of people will say keep hits to a minimum, but I certainly wouldn't say no hits necessarily.
Yeah, I mean it's an obvious caveat, isn't it? That we're never gonna hit 0 hits unless you're having the perfect season with no blowback. But it's also interesting to note that your best season was one where you took an abundance of hits, more than the average, let's say, because it's actually the only time that I've ever been in the top 5k was 2 seasons ago, and I also took about 80 something points worth of hits as well, and I think it creates a false narrative in our mind, like actually you know what, hits might be able to work. So do you think that you're a little bit biased because your best season was also just happens to be a hit heavy season, or do you think there's some like balance that we can strike?
No, it definitely has to be a balance. I don't take more hits now because I think that's the way to get top 5k. I think it's just interesting that people do say no hits a lot. And it is possible, but the flip side, maybe that's the only reason I've ever done it once. Maybe because I do take too many hits. That's another way of looking at it. So
that's true. 1 out of 10 or whatever.
Exactly.
1 out of 10 attempts.
Exactly. So maybe I should take less hits. I think in the past, like, and I'm sure I know other people do this as well because you see it on Twitter all the time. You make a transfer, it doesn't work out, you get annoyed at it, you rage transfer, you want to take that player out for a hit no matter what they've done or what the player you're bringing in is. And that's where it gets into like a bad situation, I guess. So
we could both agree that is just ridiculous and no rage transferring at all. At the very least, 0 rage hits.
Yeah, fully agree. I do. I guess. I don't know. I try and keep them to a minimum, but I'm certainly open to taking them. I'm not because some people will just not take hits, and to be fair, a lot of those people that do that also do very well. So maybe that's something to be learnt from. But I'm certainly open to them. I think having a bit of patience is probably always a key learning point that everyone has every season, but I do think there's something to be gotten from that unless you've got a really good reason to take that hit, you probably shouldn't do it. Most of the time doing nothing and reassessing tends to work out more often than you'd probably think.
Yeah, it's that odds game that you were talking about earlier. Definitely. Are you partial to a little mini wildcard now and again? Yeah,
I think that can be good. Yeah, I think because obviously you get to make 3 moves for just a 4-point hit. I'm sure there's something in there where someone will tell me that's all just a psychological thing. It's actually no better. But yeah, I think quite often, because you can just do so much more. It sounds obvious, but you can do so much more with 2 transfers than you can do with 1. Like moving cash around can be difficult with just 1 transfer.
So is it something that you do often then?
No, not really. I do find it hard to save transfers sometimes. I suppose some of it depends on how you start off as well, because it's very hard to, like, if you start off badly, I find it very difficult to like not beat myself up about it. Like, right, what can I change? And sometimes it's best.
Yeah, 100%.
It's best just to stop and just carry on basically and let it play out. And saving the transfer is good. Like I did that after lockdown, had a couple of bad game weeks, and the one where I saved the transfer, it suddenly was a pretty decent game week, and I felt a bit calmer after that. And I rolled a transfer for like 3 or 4 weeks, I think, at the end of the season. Maybe I could have done better with the transfers. It's always hard to know in FPL, but it's much easier to roll transfer I find when you're already doing well.
I think that's absolutely right. Something that I haven't thought about before is that you could probably split your seasons, your past history into 2 categories. One, a really good start, and one, a really bad start. And I bet there's a correlation between bad starts and an abundance of hits at the start of the season, because it's something that you absolutely don't want to do is fall behind game weeks 1, 2, and 3. And if you do see yourself slipping, then you're probably more likely to do that, mini wildcard or taking hits. So that's a really important distinction. It also brings us on to wildcards, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think we're both kind of in the same category as that hits are kind of okay, but also in the same vein, like we kind of want to cut back a little bit. We know ourselves that sometimes we just take a bit too many.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like reviewing why you bought that player you want to take out for 4 points. What's the big important reason they need to be out of your team? I think that can happen quite often. Like a player's not doing very well for me. It could be like a £6 million striker or a midfielder, whoever it is.
Yeah.
And like realistically, is that the transfer that has to be made? Like 100%, you have to get rid of that player. That's not costing very much money, so they're not going to score many points anyway. In most cases, obviously, sometimes you get like these Mahrez's or Kanes who are ridiculously cheap, but
that's like the anomaly, isn't it? Though those kind of players.
Yeah, my point basically is that usually like the £6 million players they're fine. They don't get you many points, but they get you some. They tick over. I guess the point is sometimes again a situation where they've not performed for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I've probably got more important transfers to make, and I've probably taken hits for those players, and it's just not worth it. Just let them tick over. Like that's
a great caveat to the rule, 100%. Like don't waste hits. If you do have to take hits, make sure it's on players that actually matter in your team, and you're not just sitting there annoyed because a very cheap player anyway isn't scoring as much as what you thought he would. All right, that's a great discussion. Rule number one, done really well there. Let's move on. Rule number two: have a core team with price points. This actually comes from a video that you did really recently with Joe, where you were hosting and you were talking to him about his price point strategy, where you would have a balanced price point for each position, and it means you can easily navigate to any player on your team within 2 moves. And it's basically 100% flexibility game week 1, where you can get to anyone you want, and it's an assumption that all your choices could potentially be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that last bit. That's like Joe's thing. Like, I get what he's saying. Like, just pretend that you've got it wrong, and then you can get out, and it makes sense because like even the top managers don't get everything right. The chances of you making the perfect game week 1 team are so slim. But I do like being able to get to most players in 2 moves. I wouldn't not pick a player who I thought was really good just because I know they were really expensive or really cheap or whatever it might be. Like, I wouldn't ever do that. But like I look at the draft I've currently got. Obviously, it's going to change loads before game week 1.
Yeah.
But there's no players I can't get in 2 moves, like defense, midfielder, or forward.
So do you do it subconsciously? Do you pick players and you know what, I don't want 2 heavy defenders, so I'll get a mid tier one like Docker or something? Do you do it instinctively now?
Maybe subconsciously, but I think ultimately certain formations just work better for this. So like I'm currently in a 3-4-3, certainly not against 3-5-2 either. I think just the prices, the way they've been done, I think 3-5-2 is actually quite difficult at the start this season.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like I've got a 3-4-3. So what I would never do is go like 5 at the back, for example, with like loads of £5 or £6 million defenders, because I feel like if you ever need to get out of that, it's probably a wild card or hits, because your money's so spread around. So if you've got 5 defenders for 6 million, that's 30 million of your budget is in the back line. If you want to suddenly upgrade a £6 million midfielder, you've either got to get rid of someone that you maybe really want to own, like Salah, for example, who could have good fixtures or whatever it might be, or you've got to take like maybe £1 million or 2 out of 2 defenders. So suddenly that's 2 transfers just to make your other one up front. And so that's where I really think about price points. I think 5 at the back formations and 4 back the back formations perfectly fine. I got nothing against them, but I just think they spread. I don't like spreading the money around to too many places. Why I would never have an expensive bench, because it makes you less flexible in making moves. So in terms of the players I pick, I usually pick like 4 or 5 players that I really want, and then work backwards from there.
Right. Okay. So you pick your core group first.
Yeah, usually. I mean, I know there's going to be a cheap goalkeeper. I know my midfielder will be 4.5 million on the bench all the time. I'll probably pick a 4 million non-playing defender, and then I'll pick maybe like Salah and Trent. They haven't left any of my drafts, for example, this season.
Yeah, of course.
And then if I decide that I want Aubameyang, and Werner hasn't moved really either, then they're kind of 4 players, and then I'll just start working backwards from there. And obviously, I'll tinker as I go. I won't necessarily say, right, this has to be the striker price. That can never change. But yeah, I definitely pick the core before I pick the rest, which I think makes sense because they're the players you're hoping gonna score the most points.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're kind of picking. You're kind of in the middle between having a definite price point strategy within your first game week build and just using common sense to build your first draft as well. And you're kind of sort of in the middle. You're aware of the price points, but you're also aware that like you're absolutely fine with having 2 7 million midfielders if it comes to them being the best for your team.
I think people can get too caught up on it as well. So like I've got Aubameyang, so straight away people will say, right, that's your Man City midfielder in game week 3, which this season a lot of people are thinking of doing. And I've got Calvert-Lewin, so that's on the fly. What's that? 19 million. Or if I could save 0.5 elsewhere, I could have Vardy and Rashford for almost the same price. Yes, it means I can't go from Rashford to a Man City mid, but I can in 2 moves still. So I'm not so inflexible. I'm having to make multiple transfers, but I might have to make an extra one. But potentially spreading the value around a little bit is better. So I wouldn't just pick Aubameyang just because he's easier to get a Man City mid, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. You're coming back to that. We can still get to whoever we want. It just means that we might need to be doing 2 instead of 1.
Yeah, basically.
I like that. Perfect. All right. Well, we're kind of in agreement there. I mean, I didn't think this was going to be a bit of a headbutt rule simply because I got it from one of the videos you did, but I figured it would be a good chat nonetheless. All right. Rule number 3, simple captain choices. No outside the box captains, stick to premiums, go with the majority unless multiple options are presented. What is your captaincy strategy tend to be?
I mean, whoever I think is going to score the most that week, and without that sounding so obvious, what I mean is, like, again, it's all about the odds, right? So,
Yeah.
Salah at home to any team that's not Man City or Man United, probably, or maybe even Chelsea, is probably a cert for some points. If he doesn't score, that's not a bad pick. That's just he hasn't scored that week. I'm not obviously expecting him to score in every single home game, but more often than not, he will. Whereas you might see, like, I don't know, like St. Maximin's got Fulham at home, and Fulham have just conceded 20 goals in 4 games. Okay, you could say they've conceded 4 goals a game for the last 5 or whatever, but still, St. Maximin on his day is not, more often than not, he's not going to score, right?
So you kind of keep a headstrong, conservative view in your captaincies, where you see that there's sometimes there's mavericks out there, but you're not one of them.
It just doesn't work out enough. Those kind of moves are like, I guess people would say this is boring, but those kind of moves, when they work out, it's great to be able to go and shout on Twitter, I captained this person that no one else did, and it paid off. Like people that captained Antonio, for example, against Norwich last year, like absolutely they should be shouting from the rooftops. And to be fair, there's a lot of reasons why that was a good move anyway, just because of how well he was playing, and obviously Norwich just not very good. But yeah. Ultimately, if it's a player that hasn't been doing well, doesn't have good stats, or whatever it might be, then if it's just a punt, like I've got a feeling this player might start doing well. Well, why do you have that feeling, or is it just literally a lucky guess almost? And at that stage, I just wouldn't captain him.
Yeah. So you're always going to keep yourself informed before making a decision. You're never going to use your gut unless it's a sure bet that they're already a decent player and they've got a good fixture and they're probably at home.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you probably need someone with I don't know, like a psychological person. The gut feeling thing, I bet, is a really interesting discussion, because I feel like most of the time when people have a gut feeling, there's actually usually a reason they're picking that player. It's not just, they haven't just plucked that player out of thin air. Like maybe subconsciously they've watched them and they thought, and then they haven't really thought about it at the time, but later on they remember how well they played in that game or whatever it might be. But I wouldn't just pluck a player. Like, I'm looking at my Game Week 1 team, for example. I wouldn't just think, do you know what, Calvert-Lewin might get a hat-trick against Spurs. Might happen. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Chances are it will not happen. So I will never captain him. It'd be great if it paid off, but yeah, I think the problem with captains is it can take a good week to a great week or a poor week to a good one. It's so important that you might as well try and get it right with the best odds, essentially.
Yeah, I think you summed it up great. I don't think we need to go into it much further. It's a very obvious rule, I think, and only the best managers who have got intricate knowledge of those maverick picks that they're doing, like say Late Riser when he's done his Martial last year, that kind of thing, or people who did Antonio, unless you know for sure that you're in with at least a chance to match the same, main pick of that week, just to kind of stick with the main pick. I like that. All right, okay, cool. So let's move on to rule number 4, wildcard with a plan. So this rule comes from me looking at my team and hating it by game week 4, 5, 6, something like that, and then just doing it there and then, just using my wildcard. And every time I do it, it doesn't really work out too well for me. I just wish it went better. And then when I look back at my history for that season, I definitely know that I could have done better in hindsight. So this time I wrote a rule, have a plan first, international break or by game week 8, or hold it and pretend I don't even have it. So what do your wildcard strategies tend to be?
In terms of when to use it, is it?
Yeah, obviously the second one tends to be more chips and stuff, but specifically the first one, what do you usually do?
Honestly, I pick my Game Week 1 team for the first 4, maybe 5 game weeks, and then I wing the wild card. I wait and see, because I don't want to plan to use it early. Like, I think I've seen people talk about that, and of course it's not a bad strategy if you've got a plan to how. And you think that's the way to maximise points, then great. But I think this year in particular, with everything that's going on, and then you got this weird winter break around game week 18, 19, I think things are going to be all over the place potentially. So I try and keep it as long as possible without keeping it for the sake of it. So I think the latest I've ever used it is like game week 12 or 13. But I've also used it in game week 2 and 3. So I'm not. It just comes with the. I couldn't even tell you. Well, last year was a bit different. I was forced to use it, but the season before,
yeah.
I think I used it in game week 5, and
Right.
I was looking at my team, and I basically thought I was trying to justify a few players like on stream and stuff, saying no, I actually think they're okay. They could come good, but then when I thought about it a little bit more, I was trying to justify too many players. Like if it was 1 or 2 players, that's fine. But I was trying to justify like 4 or 5 players, and there was suddenly 4 or 5 other players that were starting to become like looking like they were good. It was like the year of Matt Doherty for the first time, the year of Jimenez for the first time.
Yeah,
and I jumped on those players in game week 5 and just went up and up and up. But had my team been performing well, or the players have been performing well, either from a points perspective or from an underlying stats perspective, I would have probably kept it.
Right, okay. So we're coming back to the same thing we were talking about in rule number 1 with no hits, is that if your season starts really well, then it's much easier to keep your wild card. And that sounds like something that you tend to do. You have a look to see where you are in relation to your overall rank. And if you need to make a move earlier, then you're absolutely fine to do that. And you don't stick to any like plan A, route 1 kind of deals.
No hard and fast rule about when I'm going to use it. What I will say is, though, I think sometimes people, I'm definitely myself in the past, is you're almost waiting to use it until your team is like a disaster. But because you're planning ahead and you're obviously making transfers as well, realistically, unless you suddenly get 4 or 5 injuries in 1 week, and players just all go off form at the same time, your team is never going to be in a situation where there's like 7 or 8 players that have to be gotten rid of. So I tend to drop the number a little bit. It's hard to like exactly say what the rule then is, but if there's like 4 or 5 players and maybe I've got an injury, or I could change my bench, or I could move money around, then I'd probably do it. I wouldn't wait until my team is a complete disaster, because chances are, if you're an active manager, it's never going to be that bad, because you'll be making moves all the time.
Yeah, unless you started in game week 1 and you put in a bunch of really, really horrible picks, and then by that time game week 3 or 4 comes along, you have none of those, Lundstrom type players, Dockery, like you said, 18, 19, Jimenez, etc., and you want a wild card. So there's only really one time that your team would be absolutely rubbish, and it would be right after game week 1 when you realize all those shots in the dark that you took for game week 1 were wrong.
Yeah, pretty much. Unless, like I said, you get like a million injuries at once. It's you're not going to usually be in that bad a situation. So I don't think you have to wait for that point to use the wild card. But I certainly wouldn't waste it just to change like 1 or 2 players if I was happy with everything else. So I'd happily. I suppose it depends how often you have to do this. But if it was like a hit versus a wild card, I'd take the hit. I think most of the time.
I like that. That's an interesting way to do it. So we're halfway through. I think we're doing quite well. I think we've agreed on most of them, except for the last one, maybe. So we're going to take a quick break and hear a message from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. What's happening, mate? Finally up in Scotland. So good to see you. How was your trip?
Oh, trip was all right. I'm gasping for a cuppa.
Yeah, man. Just chuck your jacket in there. You want a tea or a coffee?
Well, what mugs do you have?
Wait, what? What mugs do I have?
Yeah, what receptacles are on offer?
Just normal ones? I've only got normal mugs.
It's just, I've got this mug back at home. It's exclusively for elite FPL managers. Got it from FPL Merch's Kickstarter campaign, which is currently going on at the moment. And like I say, it's tailored for managers who have had a great 19-20 FPL season.
So you don't
have one of those. Just want to be clear here.
No, I don't.
You're not an elite manager.
I know, I'm a normal fucking person, mate. Do you want a coffee or not?
Oh, I think I'll leave it, actually. Cheers.
All right, rule number 5, template team to start. So this is all about that differential versus core team, and waiting a few weeks after to see who is actually nailed, as opposed to punting game week 1. What's your experience with setting up your team in that? I know everyone hates the word, but in that kind of template scenario.
I couldn't right now. I could not tell you what percentage is the ownership is of all the players in my team. I just wouldn't tell you. Now I could guess who's high. Like I'm sure Trent is high, Salah's high, Aubameyang's high.
Yeah.
I expect Werner's quite high too. And Vinagre for sure in the FPL community, like the Twitter community and YouTube and stuff, will 100%
we love
be high.
him. We love him.
Exactly. But yeah, I don't know. And I don't care. Like if they're all less than 10%, great. If they're all 50%, just as good. I'd rather pick the player, especially at the start of the season when all you got to go on the start of the season is transfers in. How do you think that's going to affect things? Transfers out too, of course, for players like Doherty, and form from last season and fixtures, of course. Outside of that, you just don't know what's going to happen. There's going to be players that are in form in Game Week 1 you didn't expect. There's going to be players starting that you didn't expect. There's going to be players bench that you didn't expect. And that's when you start reacting. But in terms of ownership, like template team, I know why people do it, like they say it, because you can't win FPL in the first 3 weeks, but you can lose it. I just don't buy it. Like 3 weeks out of 38 is not a huge amount. And rank can be clawed back. So I think you can play the ownership game, but it's a bit dull for me. Like I don't care if my team's template at all. If these were all 50%, I wouldn't look for reasons to get rid of them. But like I say, it also doesn't bother me. And I do think to a certain extent, even if you've got like 30 to 40% owned players, the chances of some loads of other people having that exact same team is probably quite low anyway. So in some ways it's differential. So yeah, it doesn't bother me at all.
So when I say template, obviously there's lots of different ways you can interpret it, I think, because one is that one that you've just said there in the percentage. But what if I said to you, like, you've got Salah and Trent, but I'm going to start Mane and Robertson. We both know that mine is a lot more riskier, especially Game Week 1. Would you if I said that to you to try and convince you, would that be like along the lines of, nah, because I think these players are going to do much better, and also if they bang and yours don't, then you're going to be a lot further behind? Or is it just purely Salah and Trent are better?
Yeah, I mean, any player you get wrong, you're going to be further behind. So that wouldn't really come into my mind. Like those two specific examples, for me, the pricing's wrong. Salah should be 0.5 more than Mane, because I just think it takes people can make all the arguments they want for Mane, and I certainly don't think he's a bad player, and I definitely don't think he's going to be that far behind Salah.
Of course, yeah.
Salah has more shots in the box. His XG is always higher. His XA is usually higher too. Milner's not going to be around as much, you'd assume. So he's on penalties too. And we've seen what penalties can do for a player, like last year with Bruno Fernandes and Rashford and players like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So and penalties, just you can't predict.
So it doesn't even come into your mind of like, what if I go with this guy, then it's he's lower owned. You just you're purely on a one-track mind of this player is better because XYZ, so therefore I'm going to get him, and it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing in the game. The
player could be 85% owned. I don't care.
I love that.
If that's the right player. Why would I harm myself just to have a different player to someone else? Like, I'm not saying that I would never look at ownership. Like, I do think at the end of the season, it can be a talking point for a few different reasons. Like, if you're really big into mini leagues, then, if the leader's not got Salah, then that's a huge differential. But in the grand schemes of overall rank, not necessarily. And the same thing, like, if you're trying to chase rank, I think there's this myth that you have to go differential, but towards the end of the season, if you can get like a big hitter that is lowly owned, then yeah, that's a good differential. And I might look at it then, but at the start of the season, no way. Like, I just think Salah and Trent are better picks than Mane and Robertson. I might be wrong, but that's my feeling right now.
Yeah, that's perfect. It's a great answer. It's not something that you come across very often where a manager absolutely has no care in the world. I like that as an answer. All right, well, let's move on. The next one is a very easy one. Just threw that in there just in case some people need to hear it. Minimal goalkeeper transfers, rule number 6. So goalkeepers are for the long haul. Any transfers should be based on, 10, 15 game weeks or more, and really only use your wildcard to make goalkeeper transfers. Never waste a transfer on them. Is that an obvious one for you?
Especially after last season, because I did make goalkeeper transfers and it was awful. Now, part of it was a little bit of bad luck, but all everyone remembers from last season is Pope being the highest scorer. What people forget is he was awful at the start of the season, and I can't remember what game week I got rid of him. Don't know if it was like 21 or 22, somewhere around then. He went on absolute rampage and got clean sheet after clean sheet, and it was a killer. Now, some of that's hindsight. I mean, at the end of the day, I took out a player that wasn't performing to try and get someone else. But at the same time, like Pope was the highest score on 170. You go, like 7-8 goalkeepers down, like to Matt Ryan. He was only 35 points behind. So over the course of a season, that's less than 1 point a game week. Now, not that 35 points should be sniffed at, of course, when they were the same price. Like it's a big deal at the end of the season. But using transfers to try and to eat those points back, especially when what's great about these cheap goalkeepers is when they do get random clean sheets against top teams, and that's very hard to predict. So there is no way I'm making goalkeeper transfers this season. I'm going to pick one at the start, and like you said, the only time I'll change that is on Wildcard. I think I made a big mistake last year with I think I made 2 or 3 goalkeeper changes, and it was not good.
Would you agree that the goalkeeper is the hardest position to predict points for?
To a certain extent, like nailing the exact keeper that's going to be the highest scorer this season is difficult. Like if Pope stays at Burnley, there's no reason why it can't be him again. Doesn't mean I'll pick him for that price, but yeah, it can be difficult. I mean, I literally just go for the 4.5 million with the best fixtures until the first wild card.
Right.
If I wild card earlier, then maybe it wasn't the right decision. But I feel like that's a position not to worry too much about, really.
It's actually so interesting because of all the managers that I've brought in, I think 5 of them had the exact same tale of goalkeepers when we came to this rule, which was, I don't know, I've got Pope, and then I got rid of him because he was doing bad, and then I had to bring him in on my next wild card because he was doing so well again, and I was raging that I took him out.
I didn't even bring him back. That's how
you didn't even bring him back.
I got Foster. He was awful.
Oh no! And then you probably had to take him out because he started doing horrible towards the end, didn't he?
Yeah, luckily I had McCarthy on the bench, so I just played him. No, was it McCarthy? Yes, I think it was McCarthy towards the end, so I just played him instead. But yeah, I mean, like I can't remember who I took Pope out for. I think I took him out for Fabianski, who was about to have a double game week, and then he got injured, so I had to remove him for someone else. I still didn't get Pope. It was just gutter. Yeah, it was a disaster. But in general, I don't know why I took Pope out, like because I never usually do that, so it's just a bad call. I would never usually make goalkeeper transfers.
It's interesting because we come to an actual rule where everyone agrees, but then they all have the same story of, oh, I didn't do that, and I got, I shot myself in the foot because of it, so I'm going to do that again this year. It'd be interesting if I do the same mini-series next year and ask them, did you keep your goalkeepers, and see what happens, because there's always something, there's always like a transfer that you don't want to waste that you have to use and stuff, so this is what I'm going to just keep this list on my desktop, and I'm not going to sway from it all season, and hopefully come out to the good. All right, 2 more rules. Number 7, no team bias. So this is not difficult for me. I support a Scottish team. But for you, as a big Man United fan, do you find that having that bias in you hinders or helps you with Man United?
It's definitely hindered me in previous seasons because I have looked to get them in where I can.
It is a little bit of a joke on your stream, isn't it? Where you're like, I know what you guys are going to say. I know what you're going to say, but just hear me out, right? Maguire is a good pick. And like, you'll go on for a little bit and it is a bit of a giggle. But I always think in the back of my mind when I'm watching that, like, is he really being serious, or is he just having us on a little bit?
To be fair, I do usually differentiate between when I genuinely think they're a good pick or when I'm getting them in. Because a lot of the times I've said, I'm getting this player in, I'm not saying you should too, or I don't think you should. I'm prepared to take the risk that this player is not very good, but if it comes off, that's great. Like when Alexis Sanchez was an option, for example.
Of course,
I was like, I'm buying him, you shouldn't buy him, but I'm gonna. And he missed a bloody open goal against Newcastle, which is so frustrating. Still remember that. But yeah, like team bias. But obviously last year, because bias works both ways, because last year when after lockdown and stuff, it's like, well, look, Bruno's back, Pogba's back. We were looking good anyway. I think we're going to continue. But then you'll have people like, no, Man United are still rubbish. They're still that same team that had Lingard and Pereira. So sometimes bias works the other way, that people are so biased against the team, it takes them too long to catch up. So in my case, last season actually worked out quite well in the end because I was prepared to triple up. And all right, I got the Maguire call wrong, But at that point, like, we were in lockdown. I was like, I'm just going to get the players I want to get.
Yeah, of course.
Obviously, Wan-Bissaka might have been better, or was the better option.
Oh,
but
yeah,
ultimately, I think going for Man United defender wasn't a bad call. It just so happened.
No, of course not.
Suddenly, Greenwood was this huge player as well. So I don't think anyone really predicted that. So yeah, it can be detrimental. You really should have no bias, and I even include that for people that, like, maybe support Man United and don't want Man City players. Like, for me in FPL, there's no loyalty. I know people play like that, and obviously everyone can play the game they want. But to maximise the points, there should be no loyalty. Like, look at, I mentioned this on a video recently. Ben Crabtree, who won FPL, the Everton fan, will not get Liverpool players, which was fine the season he won, because although Coutinho was there and doing really well, it wasn't to the level of Salah. Well, now see how he's done since, not going for like Salah and Trent and that. It gets much more difficult. So no loyalty for me.
I absolutely agree. The amount of people who have also brought up that winner that only picked Everton players, never picked Liverpool players. I think it's really funny that we always come to see, if he hadn't won, this would have been such an easier conversation. But because there was that one time that one player did it and it became huge, then now it's a talking point. I love that. It makes it so much more interesting. But we're on the same page. Like, biases are bad. But also, if you have intricate knowledge of a team because of your bias, because you love them so much, you're probably going to see things that other managers might not necessarily see.
Definitely. Like I say, if I genuinely think that Man United player is a good option, then I'll say that. If I, like I said earlier, if I think I want them, but other people shouldn't get them, and here's reasons why, then I'll say it. But I do think you have to be careful about people. It's like Leeds right now. The Leeds fans are hugely up on Leeds. And look, they know way more than me. Way more than me. They've obviously watched them in the Championship. I don't watch the Championship. Don't pretend that I do. And they make some very good cases for why they could do really well this year. But then I look at the fixtures and think I would never back a promoted team against those fixtures. And fair enough, maybe Bielsa and Leeds are going to be a different kettle of fish altogether. But I think you've got to just... Leeds fans are very...
protective.
Well, that's not the word they use. Yeah, but they're very positive, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but I'm a bit more cautious, and so I'd like to wait and see. And I think we see that all the time. A team comes up, and there'll always be managers that, even though they don't think they're being biased, they are a little bit like subconsciously they are picking that player because it's their team. I think you've got to be careful about that. Not it's a bad trait or anything. It's just, obviously, you're always going to be drawn to your own team. You got to be careful. I'm really interested, just a side note, to see what Leeds do, because there's a lot of excitement about them this year.
Yeah, there's been so many managers that, like, I'll say this fixture's good, and then he plays this fixture, which is also good, and then they play 3 promoted teams, which are obviously good. And you almost without thinking, you say that. And then in the comments somewhere, or someone who's listened somewhere will message you and be like, you know what, I think Leeds are going to do well. And then you click on their bio and they're a Leeds fan. And that for me is all I need to say. Oh, well, I can't really trust anything you say. But at the same time, you might absolutely be right in that they know way more about Leeds than me.
Exactly.
And they're seeing something that I just can't. And it's the same thing as like the Sheffield United of last season, when they came up and a lot of managers were saying, you know what, I'm probably going to have a defender because XYZ, they've been amazing, their defensive thing, the forward running centre backs, I'm probably going to have Egan, etc. And everyone else like me and you who have no knowledge of them, who are like, oh, that's a really good fixture, I'm going to have, Joshua King or whatever for game week 1 when they play Sheffield United. It's a perfect fixture for Bournemouth. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's where we were, and then we got laughed at by all the Sheffield United fans.
I don't know if they were so... I don't know if Sheffield United fans predicted that too much. It'd be interesting to see with Leeds, because they play Liverpool first game, and I've seen a few fans that think they're actually going to do all right against some of the top teams.
Yeah, Leeds fans are definitely more vocal about it. I would definitely say that.
They could be right, though. Like I said, I would not sit here and pretend to know more than them. So I hope it works out, and they got some good fixtures coming up, and I will happily, like Sheffield United, adapt. I think that's the key. Adapt to, what's... You
captain in Salah game week 1 though?
If I don't have a Aubameyang, I will. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, right? I've had a bit of stick from some Leeds fans for saying that Leeds at home is an easy fixture, but any team at home for Salah is pretty much an easy fixture,
100%.
Apart from like the obvious Man United, Man City, etc. No, if I don't have Aubameyang, 100% will captain Salah.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. All right, last rule, and this is one that I kind of threw in at the end. My 8th rule is no mini league focus. What is your experience with mini leagues like?
Yeah, I'm not really, like, I'm in a few and it's always great to win them, but I don't really focus on them anymore. When I first started FPL and before it was like a job or a hobby, I did have a mini league with my mates that I always wanted to win, to the point where like it's not an excuse, but it'll sound like one. Like in the first few seasons, like I've got a few ranks around like 10, 15k back, it's 10 years ago, so there wasn't as many people playing anyway. But I would be like 100 points clear in my mini league with 4 or 5 game weeks to go, and I would just take hits just for the fun of it. Like back then, that's the kind of manager I was.
Yeah, because you were already way ahead. I get you.
Yeah, and I didn't really think about overall rank, and obviously now I kind of wish that I had thought about it a bit more, so I maybe have a few more top 10k finishes. So that can kind of happen. I think nowadays, for me at least, I don't really focus on them. So it's not a big issue. I do think most of the time it goes hand in hand. Obviously, if you're having a good season, chances are you're having a good mini league, success as well.
Yeah.
But it's certainly at the end of the season when you're looking at it way more, because obviously when you get down to the last 4 or 5 weeks, maybe even more weeks for some people, you do start, especially if there's big prizes. Like I've had that where, like when I used to work at EA, there might be like an Xbox on the line or something like that. Then I'm suddenly looking at a mini league because the rank's good, but it doesn't get me an Xbox. I'm then looking at a thing. So I actually had that a couple of, not last season, I think it was the season before. I was 70. It was a cash league at work, and the guy behind me was like 70 points behind. So now, even saying it out loud, I know how stupid it was to even be worried about the fact that how could he overturn that in 1 week?
Right.
But I remember saying, I need to captain Mane. He'll be less captain than Sterling. That's my only way into the top 10k. And then I knew that this rival had Sterling, so I captained him because I knew he would too. So I blocked him. And literally, it was like 6 points difference between the two. And had I captained Mane, I would have finished in the top 10k. But instead, I finished 12k. So trying to block the mini-league player, which was 70 points behind, so don't get me wrong, completely stupid to even be worrying about him with 1 week left. But that shows you that it can affect you. Like the 6 points was literally, like if I'd had 5, I would have still finished outside the top 5k. But those 6 extra points,
the exact points that you would have got.
Yeah, so frustrated about that.
What an antidote for this rule, which is don't focus on your mini league because it will screw you out of the top 10k by the exact amount of points that you would need. Oh my god, that is so good. Annie, I'm so sorry. Every single tale you've told me in this episode has been like one of sorrow, and like you've had.
I know FPL is a sad game. Basically, I don't know why we play it.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. When your very first couple of seasons, you got top 15,000. Like my first seasons, I made a team, didn't look at it ever again, and I was like top 2 million. Like you were born to play this game, mate. But yeah, you're gonna have a lot of tragedy along the way, I think.
that's just I actually just it was just outside top 20k the first season, but a similar situation being 100 points clear the second time. That was just outside top 10k. But for me though, I'm just very competitive. So once someone said to me, "Do you want to be in a mini league for this?" Straight away I was on Google, right, fantasy football tips. Straight away I found Fantasy Football Scout, and then I was commenting on that ever since, like 10 years ago. So
it's interesting how many of us have the exact same origin story. Like someone invited us to a mini league and we wanted to impress them, but we knew nothing about it. So we just hit up Fantasy Football Scout and then the rest is history.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's basically what I owe those early ranks to. Had I done that on my own, like now I'd probably be, a lot better off. But back then, because the thing, you can know as much as you want about football, but FPL just has these little, intricacies,
of course, yeah.
Like how good 4.5 million defenders actually are versus maybe more expensive ones or goalkeepers or whatever. So if you don't know that kind of thing, like I see people all the time that just start new and they, they've got like 15, £8 million players or whatever it is, rather than having a cheap bench, etc. So yeah, it was good to find that out and be competitive.
Fair play. Well, we've got to the end of our rules. I think we've done really, really well. We got some good points across, and you've kind of made me think a little bit. I'm going to have to go reassess some of these rules. But is there anything that I have actually missed that you kind of hold dear to your heart that you do every season that I've like forgotten from my list?
I don't think so. I think it's pretty much covered. Like, I mean, I guess the template one, I just don't care about it throughout the whole season, pretty much. So not even template to start, I don't care about it for the whole season. I don't think anyone.
So one of your rules would be to just not look at percentage owned at all.
For a large shot, I mean, like I said earlier, sometimes you get to the end and it can be a bit more viable. Like last season, for example, there was, Man City players, for example, were quite low owned right up until the final few weeks. Mm-hmm. And so a team that's got good fixtures is about to smash 3 or 4 goals in most of the fixtures with players that are not that badly priced either, like Sterling, Jesus, etc. They are big differentials that are worth it.
Yeah.
But just random punts for the sake of it, just to hope they. Because the thing is, like, people always say this player is only 2% owned. If he does well, I'll climb up the ranks. Yeah. If Salah also doesn't do well at the same time, if your 2% owned player gets 10 points, but so does the 50% owned player, you're still on the same points. So yeah, I definitely don't worry too much about ownership. I will talk about it because people do like it, and it can be interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess it's not like I never look at it. Maybe if I've got the choice between 2 players and I really don't know, I mean, would I pick the higher owned player or the lower owned? I don't know, actually. It would probably depend on the situation, like how far through the season we are, and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't tend to look at it. And another thing actually that's not on the list that I never do really is I don't really focus on team value that much.
Ah, there we go.
At the start of the season, I will sometimes make early transfers because the transfer market is so volatile. Like, I think last year I made, in Game Week 3, I think I made 3 transfers with a mini wildcard. I think it was De Bruyne, Mount and Pookie. And I did that on Monday. I very rarely do that these days. I would have done when I first started playing, but very rarely do I do a transfer by kind of Tuesday. Mm-hmm. But after we get through like 6 or 7 weeks or whatever, when the market kind of quietens down a bit, I don't tend to check if players are rising or falling. Like, if I think about a transfer and if a player is going to rise or fall, that'll put me off doing that, or I won't be able to do that transfer, then I might check.
Right.
But otherwise, I don't, because I think sometimes the price increases and decreases force people into transfers they don't necessarily want to make.
Yeah, 100%. We've all been there where we think that someone's going to rise and therefore we're going to not be able to do our transfer. And it turns out we do it too early. He doesn't rise. And then maybe you've got an injury come Friday that you needed to sort out.
Yeah, I'd always, as much as I can, I will wait until Friday or Saturday, pretty much.
Okay. So your extra rule for me is don't look at the percentage owned until at least, game week 30 onwards, but look at it a little bit, but also if you're going to be bringing a player in, then it might be worth waiting till Friday. And also, don't worry about your team value. That's the last rule.
Yeah, I most of the time I just don't look at ownership. There's no real need. Either that player is good or they are not.
Yeah, it's so hard to just nail down a sentence because everything is caveated with everything else, and there's so many different scenarios. But you've highlighted key things there, which is something that I'll definitely be adding to my roster. So thank you very much, man. I really appreciate you coming in and checking out my rules with me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on.
Perfect. And I'll see you again. Cheers.
Cheers.